Just coming back onto costs, maybe, Mr. Abrams, you in your evidence, which thanks, and thanks for all your evidence, you're saying that the costs to members has been significant. Do you think that the government's assessment of, HMRC's rather, estimate of the one-off costs at 14.4 million is accurate, understatement? What do you think about that for your members? I mean, would you like to...
Our members they have spent a significant amount of time, money, effort, hiring other people to assess this, to actually work out what the best possible options are for all parties in our supply chain. And I should say here, I don't just represent the oil and gas companies, I also represent all our supply chain members, and I'm here as Supply Chain Director for Oil and Gas UK. And on that regard, the costs are incremental across the whole of the chain. And when we look at the amount of effort we're putting into trying to work out what is the best way of handling the changes, we tried to put a number on this, and all we ended up with, it's in thousands and thousands of man hours put into this so far. And by the time you actually work out the cost of that, it is unlikely that the current estimate is correct.
We wouldn't have a hard number, but we'd agree, particularly for the sort of medium-sized companies who, I mean, if you look at ITV, which is our commercial broadcaster, but it has a large production entity, much like the BBC, and they hire thousands of freelancers on many different projects, programmes all over the country. In fact, filming here and filming around the world. They'd be British freelancers hired onto those shows. So the overall burden for processing all of that will be way in excess, just for the creative industries probably, of what the HMRC suggests.
Do you want to add anything into that?
And I think the thing about the administrative burden is that there is an administrative burden of actual compliance, which I think is extremely onerous, verging on almost impossible to achieve properly. And there's the reality, which is that the admin burden is so much that they will simply not comply.
So can I just come on to that? Because I was very interested in your evidence, your written evidence, that you cite the Colchester CEO of the Trust saying that they are down 100 additional nursing shifts per week as a result of IR35.
Yes.
Is there further evidence from the NHS of that kind of impact, not putting aside the costs?
Yes, the thing to bear in mind when you're looking at that is that much of the pain here is concentrated in the hospitals that are hardest to recruit for. So if you go looking for evidence from central London hospitals that are all very oversubscribed and get no problem attracting trainees, these hospitals are probably not struggling, and that's what they will tell you, simply because they already have enough substantive workers. The pain is felt in the rural areas, the hard-to-get areas, where obviously they struggle to attract both substantive staff and contract workers. If we look at, I was looking through NHS professionals data, which is the system that agencies subscribe to. I know it's labelled NHS Actually Company, but it's semi-publicly owned, as far as I understand it. But hospitals basically advertise the vacancies through them, and we could look at fill rates, and what we could see was that the fill rate had dropped by 50%, in some cases up to 75%, looking at various hospitals, at a time of contemporaneous surge in demand. So what you're seeing is that any reduction in spend there is probably actually down to the fact that they're not hiring workers, and any fool can spend less money on healthcare by hiring less workers, and you're effectively buying less healthcare, essentially. So what they've done is effectively reduced the number of workers they're getting in. You can see the demand responding to it by coming up. These reforms are making it difficult to attract people, and the primary reason is they're not commuting. Expenses. Because if you think what would happen, I would get a phone call, they would say, there is a hospital struggling, can you go there? It might be, I don't do A&E, but that maybe is a good example to think of, or an intensive care unit somewhere. That worker then buys a plane ticket, flies across the country, or perhaps a train, whatever it's going to be, pays for accommodation, which might be privately in hotels, which might be hospital accommodation, depending where it's available, but there's a charge for that. They're not willing to do that because these can be tens of thousands of pounds of expenses against which business loss can be made, which effectively are footed from your own post-tax pocket. And if it gets cancelled, as happens, 1 to 4 hour notice periods are the norm. If it gets cancelled, that's a loss you make. So it's much easier to stomach that as a pre-tax business expense, which is what in my view it really is, as it is than it is to basically foot it from your own pocket. And this applies equally to those on the big incomes, as it does on those who are, say, dietitians, or maybe some of the less skilled, even below that, some of the unskilled health workers that are doing contract work as well, even cleaning and catering. They'll end up footing this themselves. So I think there's a real injustice there in terms of the expenses, and it's hindering service delivery. So we've actually got some, from Freedom of Information Act requests, that we've only recently discovered that data is passed back to NHS Trust, which is of course the point at which we can obtain it through Freedom of Information. So we may be able to supply you with more information in the next few weeks or so, barring, shall we say, obstruction to the request. We should be able to supply you with that data.
I think that would be very helpful. I think we would very much like to see the impact on the NHS or anywhere else in the public sector.